$10,000 XRP price prediction.
Here's my price prediction chart of XRP. They're in March 25. This is in consideration of XRP ETFs getting released as we speak and a steady stream of them getting released. So this is the large spike we have here, and this could even be potentially a super cycle. So we could also see it go all the way through the summer back into March and then hit that same peak again.
Now, I'm going to be generous in this video. I want to have an open conversation about this. The video has 4,400 likes and has over 1,100 shares, which means a lot of people, especially just looking at the comments, believe that this is going to happen. So hopefully I could just shed some light on a lot of misconceptions that are taking place in the video. First and foremost, ETFs are not going to send the price of XRP to $100. If that was the case, ETF for Bitcoin would have sent the price of Bitcoin to $1 million. ETF opens up an institutional game, which means there's going to be more market making and way higher resistance levels that you have to break through to even attain these levels. The amount of value that would need to be pushed into the system would be need to be excessively extraordinary to push prices even to $20 to $30. So let's break this down.
So if we had a super cycle during the summer, I'm guessing it would be because all of the financial institution adoptions. So we're going to do TradFi, traditional finance adoption, and then we're going to have, I can't even spell the frickin' word, reserve.
Which, again, in the executive order, it didn't even talk about XRP. Trump did tweet it out on Truth Social, but even having XRP added to the crypto reserve, not necessarily going to create a supply shock that this man's talking about.
And then every ETF that happens.
And the only ETF that matters really here is going to be BlackRock, which, again, you could just use Bitcoin's data to show that it's not going to send XRP here to a price of $10,000 over the course of the next couple of years.
We have all these three things that could lead to a super cycle.
In this case, a super cycle could literally be 3 years, and it could mean a $10, $15 XRP.
What also doesn't help is that we have,
which I don't necessarily
it's been such a delayed movement in price since Trump got in, and you know, we were all expecting the executive orders for him to like sit down first week in office to have the executive order for a crypto reserve. So I think with all that news coming in so late, we have these two options, which is either a super cycle through the summer or a massive, massive spike where this is basically going to almost mirror Ethereum in price. And, you know, maybe we hit the $100 mark this summer, which would be absolutely insane. But what's insane is
that's not going to happen. Again, they like to say market cap doesn't matter, but market cap is simply the value perception of the overall market, its token value to the open market. And so, you know, they'd like to make this case that it's going to be based off price and that $2.40 is cheap. Look, guys, I mean, I got this wrong too early on. I thought XRP was going to pass the $1.50 this cycle after everything that was happening, the lawsuit, Kamala Harris and everything early on. But, you know, even at this point, you still got to be realistic. You still got to have these, you know, cautiously optimistic approaches to analyzing any of these markets. I mean, $100 XRP, you're banking on a lot of things that just won't happen. And I'll explain that here shortly.
Is that Ethereum has its price and Bitcoin has its price, and they're not really that great. Ethereum hasn't had any major developments in like 3 years since.
That's a complete lie. Everything is tokenized on top of Ethereum. If you look at TVL just in comparison, I mean, that will do enough in that case. But the amount of user wallets experience, everything's building on top of Ethereum. BNY Mellon and all these banks are using Ethereum as a fundamental layer. You can look up rwa.xyz, see what everything is being tokenized on. None of it's being tokenized on XRP. In fact, anything that's being tokenized, the next competitor closest to XRP would be XLM.
Since BlackRock took majority shares of it, and we all know Bitcoin is kind of a joke. So,
and Bitcoin's not a joke at all. This is where this show or this video completely collapses. Bitcoin is fundamentally the greatest store of value and digital commodity on the planet. This guy clearly has never studied carbon credit markets and the understanding of the negative energy markets, where Bitcoin can actually access and allow us to produce more energy than ever, and at the same time reduce our carbon emissions and CO2 emissions. There is a massive economic factor to that that brings the marginal cost of production not even close to the value proposition of what Bitcoin can actually convert in terms of energy. You could do this with flare emissions, landfills. You could do it with the Texas garbage patch if you want. So I have huge concepts that actually could participate with this. And this is happening with companies like ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and some of the largest organizations and energy providers on the world already today. So you can't even dispute that this doesn't exist. And then the other side of that is Bitcoin from an adoption scale is light years ahead of XRP, making it have a actual true value or unit of account and a store of value proposition that is looked at through organizations like even now the IMF, but more importantly, the United States government.
What would make more sense? Something with the usage of all the financial institutions in the world making a giant spike like this?
They're not all using XRP.
Or, like my previous video, following the general graph of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I think either option could happen. I really hope it's this one, obviously, but I wouldn't be surprised if we hit $5 and sink back down like my other chart, or we just skyrocket all the way up to $100. You have to think, what happens when absolutely every single bank, every single country in the world starts using that bad Larry right there?
They won't. And this is already being proven. And BNY Mellon, if you guys watch any of the TradFi summits, which quite clearly, again, I'm not making this an XRP hate video. I don't want that. I just want this to be an open conversation about, because Ripple is very successful. XRP is very successful. But it's just not realistic that these countries and governments are going to all use XRP as a reserve asset and use it to transact all their payment processes. They're going to launch their own tokenized systems. They're going to launch their own stable coins. Like most recently, you just saw Donald Trump launch USD1. But JP Morgan, BNY Mellon, also, they're all going to implement these because they want to take the transaction fees themselves. And they could build this on layer twos or other networks, including Ethereum, which are being done today. But again, XRP will be included in all of this. It's just going to be a part of a very competitive industry and sector that's emerging
in their reserves and in their banks to do cross-border payments. So that brings us to the steady lows, a stair-step action, building stairs all the way to the $10,000 mark, which would make sense because you have all of the volatility and speculation with like spikes. But this low right here, this steady low, is based solely on XRP being burned as a utility. Every single payment, every single transaction,
100,000 XRP every 100,000 XRP transmitted is one XRP burnt. And again, there's still 100 billion in circulation, so that is completely invalidated. The argument to make a case for like a 20 to 30, maybe $50 XRP would be if it would be added to a sovereign wealth fund, which is what the guy doesn't even mention in this video. But ETFs are just not going to do the damage this guy believes is actually
dipping through XRP. We have no idea what the hell this thing's going to even do. We could see Bank of America process 100,000 transactions in a day versus a couple thousand. That's ridiculous. The flow of money that would create is enough to make this guy so powerful that we barely ever see it come back down.
And again, there's a world where that exists. It's a multiverse reality that doesn't have any competitors in it. This is a free capitalist market. And I mean, quite clearly, just look at the Bloomberg interview with Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, when they ask him, hey, why didn't Donald Trump mention you in the executive order, but he mentioned other digital payments and other digital systems? Ripple has a seat at the table, but Sergey Nazarov is the one speaking up. Chainlink's integrating a lot of these services as well through their CCIP and other initiatives that they've been building out throughout the year. So just keep that in mind.
Which I think would make a lot more sense for, there's a decent amount of retail that's in XRP. Is it a lot of people with split bags of millions and billions? No.
The other part of this too is, a lot of retail is in this, but Ripple owns 50% of the XRP ledger overall, the XRP token. Why fundamentally banks would never want to pump the price of XRP to $10,000, because you're going to make Ripple a multi-decade-trillion-dollar company. In fact, maybe it might even be roughly $100 trillion worth of value. That just doesn't exist, and banks would never put themselves in that position. ever. I mean, just look at what we've seen with 1913. Read The Creature of Jekyll Island. Understand how the Federal Reserve operates. Understand how Larry Fink and these other systems, these institutions are going to operate. They're not just going to lay down their shields and swords and just obviously let XRP take over because of its tech. It's open source tech. Anybody can copy and paste this open source tech. That's exactly what happened with XLM Stellar Lumens. Stellar Lumens was founded by Jed McCaleb, who's straight up a co-founder of the XRPL and is responsible for things like Mount Gox. Yes, you heard that correctly. So, this open source tech, I just want you guys to take this into consideration. This isn't, me mad dogging XRP. I think XRP can perform very, very well this cycle. But having those crazy price targets at 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000, $10,000 based off, things that we already know have taken place and basing it off things like, oh, well, Bitcoin's slow and outdated. That's completely false and inaccurate. Oh, Ethereum, nobody's building on Ethereum. That is just false entirely. XRP is a ghost chain in comparison to the to Ethereum's network. I mean, if you want to make that case, go look at Tron and BNB and other systems. Like, they have actual use case and actual users. So again, it's not bashing on XRP. It's just, if you guys are new to this industry, be very cautious of these overly speculative, unreasonable videos. It's cool to feed into hype. It's cool to, draw out your net worth. If you hold 100 tokens, your net worth would be at 10,000 tokens, and you go, oh, it's a cheap token, so maybe this would happen. Maybe this could happen. When in reality, it's just a very toxic perspective to have in the industry, and it's going to hurt you more so in the long term, especially when these people that are advocating for XRP to go to these price points are bashing on the most fundamental, most valuable digital global commodity to ever exist, which is Bitcoin. It has the most liquid network. And again, you can simply look into the energy markets if you just disagree with that. Because if you look for 2 seconds, go look at ConocoPhillips or ExxonMobil with their Crusoe Energy developments, CleanSpark, all these different companies. Look at what they're doing with Bitcoin miners and the conversion of that energy. You could literally tokenize and create a net value out of a net waste, which Satoshi Nakamoto predicted back in 2010 in a Bitcoin thread on thermodynamic energy. So these are knowns, and the marketing to bash on the greatest asset to really ever be created and ever exist as a digital commodity to pump up your own bags never looks good for the overall industry. And again, nothing against the video, the producer here. I just want to have the open conversation. You feel free to respond back to this video on, what I'm missing here. But again, I want you to just please take into consideration the amount of competition that exists within this network, the fact that it's, an open source tech, and you have literally hundreds of corporations and banking institutions already actively committing to not using the XRP, utilizing their own stablecoins on things like Ethereum or even XLM and other networks overall, or in fact, like BNY Mellon mentioned, building their own private ledger. So there's going to be more competition from these institutions, and you have to take that into consideration when you're doing these price valuations and making assumptions on future results.